I was just I was asked to speak at a government finance officers convention about a month ago in Missouri, so I had a chance to talk to all these finance officers, and they said, indeed, that they had these huge rainy day pools that were anywhere from 20% to 75% of their budget that they had to sock away in this rainy day fund. And the reason was that unlike banks, which have this infinite credit line and can borrow anytime they want, states, they can't borrow. You know, they have to go to the voters and do a bond issue. It's a big, laborious process, and it's never certain whether it's even going to happen. They don't know if they're going to be able to auction off their bonds. So it's actually happened in Missouri there, where a city would just come to a standstill, like there would be no money for anything, and the city would stop because they didn't plan their budgets correctly. So just to make sure, they sock away all this money in rainy day funds. Well, you can't, like in California, I know the treasurer manages $70 billion in a treasurer's pool of this sort of rainy day fund. Whereas, so the state's like $26 billion in debt, and we have $70 billion sitting in this investment pool. But you're not allowed to touch it because it's all earmarked for different things. Like Governor Schwarzenegger tried to get some of the highway fund money, and the court in San Diego said, no, that's earmarked for highways. You have to use it for highways.
To interrupt, it's basically all rigged to the big mega banks, and now they've taken over society, and NAFTA and GATT has destroyed our industrial base. Knowing how this system works, Ellen Brown, and it's one thing to know it's coming. It's another thing to now see it here and to know where we're going from this point, straight down. Being a lawyer, researcher, author on the Federal Reserve, I mean, do you ever have a sense of unrealness yourself? Because I know I feel like that it's just so incredible, the earth-shaking events that are happening right now, and the public's somewhat awake, but if they had any idea just how horrific this is, I think they'd be even more awake and more angry, because I talk to so many yuppies who say, I'm glad the euro's plunging, that'll help us. No, we're going down too. We're all under the same global system. And it's people just live in denial about this. I don't think people understand. This is the beginning of the implosion, as bad as it is. We ain't seen nothing yet, as they say.
My book, Web of Debt, the theme of it is the Wizard of Oz, and that's the whole idea that nothing is what we think. Actually, the Wizard of Oz was written as a monetary allegory in the 1890s when they had a big populist movement for money reform, which is what I think we need to do today. They almost won, and now we've seen 100 years later that the bankers have messed everything up. It is time for us to step in and take back our governments by taking back the money power. We have lost the power to issue our own money and our own credit, and that's where we lost our government. So, yeah. In the case of the euro, all those countries they're all in debt. Now, how is that possible if they're all in debt? It's because they're in debt to bankers, which create their money and lend it to them. And it's
designed, the bankers brag, as a black hole to consolidate the small banks, to bankrupt the states, the nations. It is designed to give them total power.
That's right. And the head is at the Bank for International Settlements, which is now tightening the screws even more they're talking about imposing,
global VAT, global carbon taxes. Yeah, break down from your research the pyramidal power structure. Who's at the top? And again, the very bankers that engineered the crisis now saying, give us global taxes, give us total control, or the economy's going to implode.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way the bankers in general have kept a tight rein on economies is by contracting the money supply. So they never allow enough money to be out there to run the whole economy. And therefore, people have to borrow. And that starts this whole pyramid or Ponzi scheme where you have to have more and more borrowers to support the money supply. So you could say that the Bank for International Settlements is responsible for all this whole collapse of this whole recent collapse. In 1988, they imposed Basel I, the first capital requirement. And at that time, the Japanese banks were the biggest creditors in the world. The Japanese economy was booming, and the banks were huge. And so the Bank for International Settlements raised the capital requirement a mere 2%, from 6% to 8%. But because the Japanese banks didn't have it, they froze. So that just killed the Japanese banks, and they actually were nationalized, although they didn't use that term, but that was the only way they could keep them alive. So Japan has never recovered from that. But we avoided it, our Wall Street banks avoided it, by getting into this whole securitization thing where the banks would bundle up loans and sell them off to investors.
Well, they didn't just survive, they got more power. That was their next phase, to economically destroy the West.
Right. Well, then when they no longer were even going to have the loans on their books, they didn't care what was in these loans, because it wasn't going to be their problem. So they were doing subprime. Any borrower that walked in the door, they would sign them up because they churned the loans, got fees. And
then they sold those as AAA rated, certifying pure garbage. This has been an amazing interview. I look forward to having you back on in the future. Ellen Brown, people can find out more at ellenbrown.com, or they can go to webofdebt.com. Of course, our websites are infowars.com and prisonplanet.com. But in the last 30 seconds, how long do you think it'll be until they fully implode the U.S. publicly?
Well, I'm hoping that what we need to do is set up our own independent credit system, and then we can avoid that. If we set up a better mousetrap, then we can let all the big banks and the derivatives team, et cetera, collapse, and we will have our own funding mechanism. That's my hope.
You know what? Do a minute or two on the other side with us. I want to ask you that question about are other states looking at the Bank of North Dakota model? But going back to a final comment from Ellen Brown, lawyer, author, and researcher on the banking system worldwide. Just real fast, because the show's almost over and we appreciate your time. Are other states now starting to look at this? Because I'm hearing a lot of talk about the State Bank of North Dakota. I'm hearing a lot of talk about trying to get legislation for the states to save themselves. We know the states have a big appetite for 10th Amendment, 9th Amendment powers right now, and there's a big awakening. Are we seeing any movement towards other states setting up their own banking system?
Yes, yes. There are actually 5 states that have bills pending. 3 of them with full-blown bills, that talk about where they're going to get capital and deposits, and that would be Michigan, Illinois, and Washington State. And then 2 other states that are proposing to study such a bill. And then there are 3 other states besides that where they've discussed it in the legislature, and they're talking about doing bills. And there are 8 candidates from all different persuasions. I think there's 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 2 Greens, and 1 independent that are all including it in their platform.
So this is really starting to gain steam thanks to your work and others out there. Let me guess, the Federal Reserve lobbyists are against this.
I really haven't heard anyone be against it. I did see one objection in the Detroit News. Somebody said that Detroit didn't have $150 million, which is what they were proposing for their capital base. But that's what I started to say about that CAFR money, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, the Rainy Day Fund. You could tap up that money as your capital base, even though you can't spend it. You can invest it. So you could invest that money as capital in a bank. Or pension funds, they invest in equity, stock equities, so they could do it. Joseph Stiglitz said that $700 billion that was put up for bailing out the banks, what they should have done was use that $700 billion as a capital for a bank, and they would have $7 trillion in credit.
Yeah, but that gives people control of their own lives and makes government sovereign, and we don't want that. And of course, he's a 2-time Nobel Prize winner, one of the prizes for economics. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
You bet. Yeah, we're slaves of the bankers, and there's a global rebellion, an awakening happening against these people. And they'll distract you with the Republican, Democrat, black versus white, all this other stuff. They'll make movies like Machete to glorify race war, to try to get us fighting with each other and paint it as liberal. It's nothing but divide and conquer. And clearly, the people are now beginning to understand that we better defeat the New World Order or none of us have any future. These people are ruthless, and they're not going to back off. And stock markets are plunging. The global financial crisis right now is even worse than what was happening 2 years ago. It's a continuation of the same thing.